The theater lights blazed as a small, timid Filipino girl slowly walked onto the massive stage. She looked out of place, her simple dress, worn shoes, and nervous posture instantly caught the attention of the crowd. A low wave of murmurs rippled through the audience, followed by giggles and whispers. Some people smirked, assuming she was just another hopeful who would be quickly forgotten. The judges exchanged doubtful glances, their expressions showing little confidence in the shy girl standing before them. The host smiled kindly and asked her name. Her voice was soft, almost trembling, as she introduced herself. When asked why she came, she hesitated, then admitted that singing was her only dream. She explained how people often told her she would never succeed because she came from poverty, and those words had haunted her for years. Her honesty silenced a few in the audience, but others still chuckled under their breath. She clutched the microphone tighter, her knuckles turning pale. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her, and for a split second, it looked as if she might break. But instead, her eyes glimmered with a quiet fire. She inhaled deeply, summoning every ounce of courage she had hidden inside her fragile frame. Simon Cowell, leaning back in his chair, raised an eyebrow and sighed impatiently. "Whenever you're ready," he said, almost dismissively. The girl nodded slowly, closing her eyes as the first notes of the background music filled the arena. The audience braced themselves, many expecting an awkward and shaky attempt. But in that fragile silence before her first note, something about her determined expression hinted that the story about to unfold would be nothing like what anyone had imagined. The music swelled softly, and for a moment she stood frozen, eyes shut tight, clutching the microphone like it was her only lifeline. Then, as the first note left her lips, the entire auditorium seemed to shift. Her voice was not timid or weak as many expected, it was rich, powerful, and laced with raw emotion that cut straight into the heart. The audience, who had moments ago laughed and whispered, now fell completely silent. Their smirks melted into wide-eyed stares. The judges, stunned, leaned forward as though they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Her tone carried both strength and fragility, a haunting beauty born from hardship and hope. Each note painted her story, the nights she sang to herself when she was hungry, the dreams she nurtured despite the world's cruel dismissals, and the unshakable will to rise above mockery. Simon's skeptical expression changed almost instantly. He blinked, leaned closer, and whispered under his breath, "Wow." His eyes, usually sharp and critical, softened with every lyric she delivered. As her voice soared into the chorus, the audience erupted, unable to hold back their cheers. Some stood on their feet, clapping rhythmically, while others wiped tears streaming down their cheeks. Her song had transcended language and culture, it was pure, unfiltered soul. She sang as if she were releasing years of pain in one breathtaking performance. The little girl who had walked onto the stage trembling was now commanding the entire arena, her voice echoing through every corner, demanding to be heard. By the time she reached the last chorus, the same crowd that once doubted her was cheering her name, swept away by the sheer power of her gift. And in that moment, she was no longer just a poor girl, they saw her as a star. As the girl reached the final stretch of her song, the atmosphere inside the auditorium was electric. Every note seemed to pierce the silence like a prayer, raw and heartfelt, each syllable carrying the weight of her struggles and dreams. Her voice cracked slightly with emotion, but instead of weakening the performance, it made it even more powerful, authentic and soul-stirring. Simon Cowell, who had been notorious for his cold critiques, sat motionless for a moment, his eyes locked on the stage. His usual stern expression had softened, and though he tried to maintain composure, the shimmer of moisture in his eyes betrayed his feelings. A tear rolled down his cheek, a sight so rare that even the cameras zoomed in to capture it. Gasps spread across the crowd, Simon Cowell was crying. The last note rang out, long and haunting, then faded into silence. For a heartbeat, the room was completely still, as if no one dared breathe. And then, an explosion of applause. The audience leapt to their feet, cheering and clapping wildly. Some shouted her name, others screamed, "Bravo," at the top of their lungs. The judges rose one by one, giving her a standing ovation. The girl stood trembling, clutching the microphone, unable to believe what she had just done. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with a smile of pure relief. She had expected rejection, mockery, maybe even humiliation. Instead, she was being celebrated as though she were already a champion. Simon stood up slowly, his eyes still glistening, and clapped his hands with deliberate respect. For the first time in years, the so-called toughest judge was visibly moved. And when the noise finally died down, his voice cracked slightly as he whispered into his microphone, "That was unforgettable." The theater was still roaring with applause when Simon raised his hand, signaling for silence. The crowd quieted down instantly, waiting for his judgment. He looked at the young girl, still trembling on stage, and shook his head slowly in disbelief. "I don't think you realize," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "just how extraordinary that was." The girl's eyes widened, tears brimming as she tried to steady her breathing. Simon glanced at the other judges, who were nodding in agreement, their expressions full of admiration. Then he turned back to her and leaned forward. "That wasn't just singing," he continued. "That was pure heart. That was life. That was the kind of performance that reminds us why we do this show." The audience began chanting, "Golden buzzer. Golden buzzer," louder and louder, until the entire theater shook with their voices. The girl covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe this was happening. And then, without hesitation, Simon reached forward and slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. The moment the button lit up, golden confetti burst from the ceiling, showering the stage in a dazzling storm of glitter. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers, some people jumping to their feet, waving their arms in celebration. The girl collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, her small frame trembling as the confetti rained around her. The host rushed to her side, lifting her gently and hugging her tightly. The judges stood clapping, some even wiping their eyes. Simon, breaking his usual reserve, walked onto the stage. He bent down, hugged her softly, and whispered in her ear, "You've just changed your life forever." And in that moment, the world believed him. The girl's life transformed overnight. Within hours of her audition airing, clips flooded social media, spreading like wildfire. The headline read everywhere, "Poor Filipino girl brings Simon Cowell to tears." Millions clicked, watched, and shared her performance, unable to believe the sheer emotion and power of her voice. Comments poured in, people across the globe confessed that her singing gave them goosebumps, that she had made them cry, that her story inspired them to keep chasing their own dreams no matter the odds. Back in her tiny village, her family and neighbors gathered around a small television, their faces glowing with pride. Tears streamed as they watched the same girl who once sang on dusty streets now stand tall under golden confetti on the world's biggest stage. Children who had once teased her now looked at her with admiration, realizing she had proven them wrong. News outlets around the world picked up her story, calling her the voice of hope and the Cinderella of the stage. Interviews poured in, fans sent letters of encouragement, and music producers reached out with offers. But through it all, she remained humble, always remembering the nights she sang just to ease her hunger, the days she was mocked for being poor, and the dream that kept her going. Her audition became more than just a performance, it became a symbol. She showed the world that talent doesn't come from wealth, fame, or privilege. It comes from the heart, from resilience, and from believing in yourself when no one else will. As Simon had whispered to her on that unforgettable night, she had indeed changed her life forever. And in doing so, she gave hope to millions.